Hi, everyone. I am Beth Wanner from Mother Cover, and we're diving into the four pillars of parental leave. And this video is about the business case for why companies should proactively and holistically budget for parental leave. And I'm joined by Dr. Kristin Tugman, the CEO and founder of Tugman Consulting. Dr. Tugman has spent more than 20 years helping organizations implement solutions that maximize productivity and minimize absence while supporting employee well-being. She brings a really valuable perspective to this conversation because she understands the human and the organizational impacts of how companies plan for leave. So, Kristen, thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited for this topic because I think it's really overlooked. So we're going to focus on the financial planning pillar because it's one of the biggest gaps at companies who say that they support parental leave and maybe have a paid leave policy, but they don't actually plan and budget for all the elements that really should be included in, like what we're saying, a holistic parental leave policy. And when that happens, the cost doesn't go away. It just shows up somewhere else, whether that's in burnout or attrition or lost productivity. So that's what I would love to dig into with you. And yeah, I'd love to start at a high level. So, from your experience working with employers around productivity and absence management, why do you think so many organizations still treat parental leave as an unexpected cost rather than something that should be proactively planned for?
I mean, I think it's the fundamental nature of corporate America in the sense that they sort of start at a deficit, right? So if you think about where we are in corporate America and have been over the last many, many years, my whole career, and probably before that, doing more with less and continuing to do more with less, right? So I think a lot of employers would say to you that we have workforce planning and we do plan for leaves, but if you start at a deficit, how much are you really planning, right? So I think too often employees and even, in my own corporate career, anytime an employee says, I need to go out on leave for any reason, even a planned maternity leave or parental leave, when you have significant notice, you panic because you don't have employees at work that you don't need desperately. So I think that's sort of the issue when you start out at a deficit. Even the best planning means that you're still at a deficit. And so I think that's really the crux of the issue, to be honest.
And with companies getting leaner, we talk about this a lot too, is that, as you're saying, that there isn't that excess where maybe there used to be a little bit of redundancy or a little bit of ability to stretch that just really isn't how a lot of companies are being built or how they're operating right now. So
Exactly.
yeah, often the financial impact of leave shows up in places that companies don't immediately see. So, what are some of the overlooked or hidden costs companies incur when they don't properly plan for leave?
Yeah, I think morale is one. We find that if employees are continuing to have to cover for somebody, they have, significantly decreased morale. So if I'm already doing, so again, if we start at a deficit and an employee already feels relatively overworked and gets stressed when they go out on vacation and tries to figure out how am I going to get my work covered and how am I gonna prepare for that and how am I gonna transition back and what's that gonna look like, for me, and, how much is this vacation actually gonna be worth it? So if we start sort of from that premise, and then suddenly somebody has to cover, or even if it's planned, the individual's thinking to themselves, "Okay, so I'm already stretched, and now I'm gonna be even more stretched for this period of time." So morale, right? And then what happens is there's an immediate productivity impact. You have the nature of it is really presenteeism. So people are discouraged. That often leads into cynicism, which can certainly lead to burnout. And then presenteeism happens when, the person is at work, but not really at work. And so you have a significant productivity decline that really goes absolutely overlooked when we find that people are running constantly and they're just trying to get the work done. And so to stop and actually have a conversation with employees is, while we know intuitively that makes the most sense, is to say, hey, how are you doing? Thanks. I see you. I see that you're sacrificing. We really appreciate you covering. people are running too fast. Managers are running too fast to slow down and really talk to employees about their well-being. So in the end, you start to have, that decrease in morale, you have a decrease in productivity, that can lead to attrition. And honestly, it also can lead to healthcare issues, or health issues. Decrease in morale, frustration, cynicism puts us at risk of a mental health condition, can put us at risk of exacerbating a comorbid condition. So all of it can snowball when it really just started with morale. And that's something that can be addressed pretty easily, in the sense of just kind of making sure that managers have the tools and the skills to recognize when employees are struggling and take the time to stop and talk to employees. And too often managers are considered technical experts, not necessarily people managers, right? So there's two aspects to being a manager. It's caring for your people and being that technical expert, and the first one often gets lost. And so that, certainly can lead to all the things that I just talked about.
And a common theme that we talk about, and I believe has come up in other segments of these talking about these 4 pillars, is the concept of winning the manager lottery. Of you'd have a manager that, like you said, also has those technical skills and those people skills and can recognize burnout or when you're on the path to burnout before you're actually there, versus having the systems in place for across the company that gives the managers those tools, or hopefully avoids it in the first place. So this is where team dynamic really does come into play. So what tends
Absolutely.
to happen to teams when they absorb additional workload, and I don't know of any companies that really track how often a particular individual may be covering for somebody else. So we sometimes think of it as a single event. If somebody is going on parental leave, that we asked this individual to cover once, but did they just come off of covering for somebody for a vacation or other types of absences? So when they absorb additional workload during unplanned absence or planned absence, how does that impact the employee well-being? And as you're always saying about how that leads to burnout, but maybe more about like the productivity side, because that is a big topic in corporate America about how do we increase productivity?
Sure. Um, yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, we talked about the Aflac study that just came out, and when I was in my former corporate life, participated in that study with my colleague Jenny at Aflac, and one of the things that we intuitively knew was that that employees would experience health ramifications as a result of having to cover. And that's, I think, one of the things that was so telling in the study, that while we watched morale decrease and that frustration set in, but we also saw really hard numbers around increases in new mental health conditions, in new physical conditions for those covering, and exacerbations in existing mental health conditions and existing physical conditions, even leading to comorbid conditions. And that was, I mean, you could look at it one of two ways. You could say if it's 1 in 4, that's okay. If but 1 is too many, right? So that's like it was like 27% of people experienced a health condition exacerbation or a new condition. And so what happens there is that you have additional leaves. And so somebody who's covering for somebody is gonna go out more likely than somebody who is not having to cover for somebody else. And then what does that do? That increases your healthcare costs. And we know, right, healthcare costs are increasing at an unsustainable rate, 6 to 8% over the year over year, at least through 2028, probably more than that, as have we will experience the ramifications of the Affordable Care Act subsidies going away and people falling off of health insurance. So this is the most important time that I can think about in my career for employers to really think about these things and think about how they create a sustainable workforce that empowers employees to stay well and to use the benefits they have in place when they need them, and to create an environment that says it's okay to get the care that you need. It's okay to go out and have a baby. And at the same time, we're going to support this workforce so that they stay healthy. And that it's hard for employers to look ahead. Like I talked about, the crux of the issue is more with less, more with less, more with less. But it's more important now than ever to care for the well-being of your workforce so that those healthcare costs don't become exacerbated. And we can't continue to put our heads in the sand and hope that employees just continue to cover as they've always covered and not experience ramifications.
Yeah, I often say for the majority of companies who have not brought in support when somebody goes on leave that maybe worked in the past, I would still argue that it probably didn't if you talk to the stakeholders involved in that, but it is definitely not working now. And I think more employees are being vocal about that. There's more studies to support that, and we'll link to the study that you mentioned so everyone can read that as well too. But when companies think about leave budgets, they often only focus on salary continuation or the paid leave benefits. How should organizations be thinking more broadly about the full cost of leave, including coverage, productivity, team impact, maybe turnover? How should they kind of come up with a model to actually see what leave, how they actually, I guess, should budget for leave?
Yeah, and I think one of the mistakes, and this is a concept I use a lot with my work around transitional return to work. Um, so bringing folks back from a leave in a, in a timely and healthy way. And one of the biggest mistakes employers make is that they don't understand or can't define the minimum output that they need from their employees in order to consider them productive. So why is that important to this conversation? Because if I don't know that, then I can't prioritize work in a way that allows me to sustainably cover a leave when someone's away. So we talk a lot about, right, doing more with less and employers are at a deficit. I don't expect that to change anytime soon, but what we can do is understand the work that is priority, right? Because we all have work that just feels like, geez, if if I have, as a consultant, I realize when now that I don't have 7,000 emails a day that I need to go through, I have a lot more spare time. If I don't have 85 conference calls that I think to myself, geez, that could have been a quick one-off conversation, didn't need to be a full call. So there's all kinds of work that occurs in every workplace that could be reprioritized as not necessary. And so I think if employers did that work, then they would be able to redistribute someone's role in a much more effective way that wouldn't necessarily require them to budget for a bunch of extra employees or to overstaff in a way that they're not comfortable with, because we get that pushback a lot. Well, I can't just hire people. Well, let's really think then about where we should be prioritizing that person's work and redistribute it in a way that makes sense. So, again, if employers can understand the minimum output that they need from their employees in order to consider them productive, as a really good first step.
That's really interesting that you frame it that way, and that's how a lot of clients that we work with when we step in, more often than not, we're stepping in fractionally. It forces that conversation about what are the key things that are really critical during that period, that can't be saddled with the rest of the team. But there are some things that maybe can be paused, some things that can be distributed. But thinking about it in different ways of, again, doing that workforce planning and just looking at it a little bit differently.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you. This has been really helpful perspective, especially around how to reframe leave as both a workforce and a well-being issue. So to close, I would love to end on something actionable. So if there's one action leaders or companies should take this Women's History Month to better plan and support parental leave, what would you suggest?
I mean, I think it's so interesting. I did, right before I left corporate America, I did a study on perinatal mental health. And, I have a 23-year-old daughter. And so when I went out on maternity leave, I was only out for 6 weeks and, there was no transition and all that good stuff. And I expected, because it was 23 years later, that things would have changed, that attitudes would have changed, and that it would be much easier for new mothers to come back to the workplace. And actually what I found was that the stigma was the same, the challenges were just different. And so what I would say for Women's History Month, please let's let's acknowledge that is a natural thing for us to have the baby, and it is also a natural thing for us to, as women, to want to come back to work and live into our values in both ways, contribute to the workforce and contribute to society as a mother. And so I think it's just, if employers can do one thing, it's just normalize the fact that it's okay, and it can be difficult to return to work, but it's so important to the workforce to equalize it so that we give women the equal opportunity as men to gain value from their careers, and that we create that opportunity for equity.
I absolutely love that message and the call to action. I think it's important to realize how far we've come, but also what hasn't gone nearly far enough. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing all of your wisdom and expertise and joining me here today.